Welcome to the debate. Today, we are focusing on a subject that, well, despite being a really common experience for maybe 20 to 40% of men, often remains sort of obscured by unnecessary shame. We're talking about achieving fundamental control and mastery over the ejaculatory reflex. The material we're looking at makes a pretty powerful case that this is actually a fully trainable skill, not some kind of permanent deficiency. So the question really becomes, what's the foundational strategy here? The debate for us today is centered on identifying the most lasting and impactful intervention for control. Is the primary leverage point, the targeted physiological training of the musculature and the physical system? Or is it more about conscious neurological and psychological restructuring? I'm going to argue that the path to mastery really has to begin with the physical mechanics, training the body first.
Right. And I suppose I come at it from a slightly different angle. While, look, no one disputes the necessity of a strong physical foundation. My argument is that the most lasting intervention has got to address the root systemic issue. Ejaculatory control, fundamentally, it's a neurological event, right? It's governed by the autonomic nervous system. So I believe the enduring solution lies in achieving conscious nervous system and psychological regulation. Because without fixing the command center, so to speak, the body's just going to remain unreliable.
Okay, I see why you'd emphasize the command center, but let's start with the architecture of the reflex itself. The ejaculatory process, while it's definitely influenced by external stressors, anxiety, and so on, it is ultimately a muscular event, so control must therefore be built on solid, capable musculature. The foundation, as the material really highlights, is the pelvic floor, that complex of muscles controlling contraction during orgasm. If you can't physically control those muscles, no amount of mental focus is going to stop an involuntary spasm, right? The 2014 study on pelvic floor rehab, it confirms its effectiveness for men with chronic PE. And that's powerful physical evidence. Our strategy has to integrate both standard Kegels, which build strength and endurance, and the often overlooked reverse Kegels.
Can you just clarify, what's the practical difference you see in the reverse Kegel specifically?
Yeah, it's absolutely crucial. Standard Kegels teach contraction, building strength. Reverse Kegels teach conscious relaxation. This trains the physical capacity to literally pull back from the edge by relaxing the very muscles that automatically start to contract when arousal peaks. This isn't just theory. It's about providing a physical safety switch. And furthermore, we can't forget whole body conditioning. That 5-exercise home routine, bridges, plank, squats, it strengthens the entire pelvic and core region, improves blood flow, and provides the general physical capacity needed for sexual endurance. The physical capacity just has to exist before the mind can exert command effectively.
That's a compelling anatomical argument, definitely, but I would frame the clinical reality maybe a bit differently. While I completely agree that physical training addresses the immediate mechanism, I'd maintain it often treats the symptom, not the underlying cause. The source material draws a strong, pretty clear link between PE and sympathetic nervous system overdrive, that, deep-seated systemic fight-or-flight response. When the entire system is kind of stuck in perpetual stress mode, which is, let's face it, common in modern life, pure muscle strength will frequently just fail to override the premature firing of the reflex. If the nervous system is the accelerator pedal stuck to the floor, training the pelvic floor is maybe like improving the brakes. It helps, sure, but the engine is still raging. So therefore, the most foundational and I think effective long-term solution must address that nervous system imbalance. I believe the fastest, most direct path to interrupt that sympathetic drive in real time is the conscious, moment-by-moment activation of the parasympathetic system. This is really where techniques like diaphragmatic breathing come into play. When you execute that specific 4-count inhale and that slow, deliberate 6-count exhale, you are literally signaling safety to your brain, interrupting the sympathetic rush, and calming the system right then and there. The essential skill isn't really about physical strength per se. It's sexual mindfulness, that ability to break the vicious psychological conditioning cycle where anxiety basically pre-programs the brain for failure. Without that mental clarity and nervous system regulation, the body simply fails often to execute the physical techniques when they're needed most critically.
Okay, I appreciate the focus on neurological health, I really do. But let's look at how targeted physical conditioning, when it's done consistently, actually acts as a profound and direct neurological lever itself. I want to go back to that groundbreaking 2024 study mentioned in the material. This research demonstrated that just 2 weeks of high-intensity interval training, HIIT, significantly improved ejaculatory control. Now, this isn't just about general fitness. When you train your body to tolerate high-level physiological stress through things like burpees and squat jumps, you are fundamentally widening the capacity of your cardiovascular system and, importantly, training your body to recover faster from stress. This physical conditioning provides a much wider functional window before the nervous system hits the panic button during intimacy. It boosts overall function, boosts blood flow, giving the body a larger margin of safety, which in turn provides the necessary physiological stability for the mind to actually succeed.
I'm sorry, I just don't quite buy the primacy of the purely muscular strength interpretation there. That study is fascinating, absolutely. But why does the source material attribute HIIT success? It explicitly states that HIIT is effective because it improves autonomic nervous system balance and heart rate variability, HRV, thereby reducing the very sympathetic activation we were just discussing. So, in other words, the mechanism isn't really the sheer physical strength gained. The primary therapeutic effect seems to be the neurological rebalancing it enforces. If we agree that the core problem is nervous system overdrive, then the intervention that directly regulates that system, whether it's conscious breathing or the systemic balancing achieved by HIIT, well, that seems foundational. The muscle benefit feels secondary almost to the neurological stability achieved.
Okay, I recognize the strength of your neurological argument regarding the mechanism. Fair enough. But let's talk about a mechanical intervention that, well, it doesn't wait for your HRV to stabilize. Technical control. This relies pretty much entirely on physical awareness built through training. Even if anxiety is present, that physical readiness facilitates immediate interventions like the squeeze technique. And we have clinical support for this, specifically that 2007 study demonstrating its effectiveness. This is an immediate mechanical act of desensitization and distraction. You absolutely have to know your body well enough to execute the squeeze correctly, to target the precise location, apply the right pressure. And that intimate, reliable physical knowledge comes only from daily focused practice and training the pelvic floor. It's an act of physical intervention overriding the reflex, you see?
That's a compelling point. And the squeeze technique is certainly, well, it's an essential tool in the toolbox. But have you considered that its success is almost entirely contingent on mindfulness? The efficacy of both the squeeze and the start-stop methods hinges completely on your ability to recognize that point of no return. You know, the moment you cross maybe an 8 or 9 out of 10 on the arousal scale. If deep-seated performance anxiety is causing that sympathetic overdrive to trigger the reflex prematurely, you often won't even have the mental presence or the bandwidth to identify that critical moment. The anxiety basically short-circuits the cognitive ability needed to withdraw and apply a physical technique. And that's precisely why addressing the anxiety through things like cognitive restructuring, improving emotional communication with partners, and conscious internal focusing is the absolutely critical first step, in my view.
It gives you the necessary mental distance to observe the rising arousal curve rather than just reacting blindly to it.
I disagree slightly that mindfulness needs to be abstractly developed first. I would actually argue that the reverse Kegel is the most practical daily mindfulness tool you can use specifically for the pelvic floor. It is physical training that simultaneously teaches relaxation and specific muscle awareness. By repeatedly practicing the feeling of relaxing those muscles under concentration, you are integrating the physical skill with the mental relaxation response. This makes the concept of mindfulness concrete, tangible, and highly actionable for initial control, linking the mind directly to the physical action that matters most, the ability to relax under rising stimulation. It's integrated mastery, really.
I hear the practicality argument, I do. But I'm sorry, I just don't buy that it's the most powerful mental tool available described in the material. Let me tell you why. The material discussed the unique power of testicle breathing. Now, I know that term sounds abstract, maybe even a bit mystical, but the mechanism described is potentially profoundly powerful. It's presented as a specific, focused visualization technique designed for redirecting arousal energy, moving it, conceptually, up the spine and away from the immediate site of stimulation.
And the reports of client success associated with this technique are described as dramatic. We're talking about men apparently going from barely lasting a minute to achieving significantly extended durations, sometimes even 2-hour sessions mentioned. You really can't tell me that pure muscular contraction or relaxation delivers that kind of profound systemic rerouting of energy flow and neurological focus. It seems to target the deeper energetic and nervous system pathways in a way that pure muscle training, well, it simply cannot match. It sounds like specialized neurological and energetic control for managing those really high arousal states.
Look, we both clearly agree that the material demands a truly holistic approach. There's obviously no single magic bullet solution here. But we do have to maintain our prioritization based on the arguments. The structural blueprint provided in the source material, that 30-day challenge, it clearly prioritizes physical consistency first. Daily HIIT and 3 focused sets of Kegels are put right at the forefront. This structure seems to demonstrate that physical consistency is intended to build the functional capacity and endurance first, creating a reliable baseline. This physiological foundation then makes the subsequent mental and mindfulness work both possible and much more effective. You need the robust physical mechanism to be reliable before the psychological overlays can truly succeed under pressure.
Right. But I would counter that the success of all those supportive lifestyle factors mentioned throughout the material, optimizing sleep, reducing stimulants, yoga, consistent aerobic exercise, actually confirms my position on prioritization. These aren't primarily muscle-building activities, are they? These interventions work fundamentally by upregulating positive brain chemistry, stabilizing things like serotonin and neurotrophic factor, and profoundly calming the overall nervous system. This, to me, confirms that long-term ejaculatory control is primarily a reflection of stable internal neurological and psychological balance, which then allows the physical function to normalize rather than muscle strength being the primary initiating driver of control. You train the nervous system to feel safe, essentially, and the physical control naturally follows.
Okay, so to summarize my position, the path to mastery, while it absolutely requires mental engagement, is inherently physical at its core because the body is trainable and responsive to concrete action. Consistent application of focused physical exercises, specifically pelvic floor rehabilitation and systemic conditioning like HIIT, provides the most concrete, measurable, and I believe reliable foundation for control. This consistent physical commitment is what transitions an involuntary reflex into an attainable skill, ensuring the individual has the mechanical ability and the physiological endurance to delay ejaculation when it truly matters most.
And the key takeaway from me remains that ejaculatory mastery is fundamentally achieved by regulating the autonomic nervous system and consciously dismantling that psychological cycle of performance anxiety. This mastery is built through conscious internal practices like diaphragmatic breathing, HRV training, and sexual mindfulness. This intellectual and neurological shift, I think, turns intimacy from what can be a terrifying performance test into a system of present moment awareness, where the nervous system remains balanced and the mind is clear enough to actually deploy physical techniques effectively when needed.
And I think we both share a deep respect for the comprehensive evidence presented in the material and definitely recognize the absolute necessity of consistency in practice, whether that practice is primarily physical or mental.
Absolutely. Yeah, we both acknowledge that the complexity of achieving this kind of control really requires exploring both physical conditioning and neurological balance. Listeners should probably recognize that true mastery often requires multiple perspectives to fully appreciate the path forward. And there is clearly much more to explore in the material regarding the intricate interplay between the body and the mind in achieving this goal.